Welcome to today's episode. I'm your host, Reed Stone. Alongside me is my co-host, Bob Foley, and our guest today is Dr. Sara Zeff Geber. Dr. Geber is the 2018 recipient of the Influencer in Aging designation by PBS's Next Avenue and is an author and professional speaker on retirement and aging and has developed a niche specialty working with solo agers. With her speaking and writing, Sara has been raising awareness of solo agers for the past 10 years. She believes solo agers have unique needs in later life that warrant greater foresight and a more robust approach to planning. She has been a regular contributor to Forbes.com on the topics of aging and retirement and is a fellow at Nexus Insights, a think tank and incubator for revolutionary concepts in senior living and aging. In 2023, Sara was the guest editor of the summer issue of the American Society on Aging's Generations Journal, one of the most popular issues ever released, containing 16 articles on a wide variety of topics important to solo agers. Sara is also active in the Retirement Coaches Association, which Bob and I are members of, and that's how we know Sara. She's active in the American Society of Aging, the Life Planning Network, the Transition Network, and the Sonoma County section on aging. Welcome, Sara. Thanks for joining Bob and I to talk about such an important topic and a topic that Bob and I really believe is often overlooked, and there isn't enough really time spent on this type of planning. So thanks for joining us today, Sara.
Thanks, Reed, and thanks for inviting me. Thanks to both of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump right into it, Sara. Let's start by defining what do you mean by solo aging and solo agers?
Sure. Well, I have to say my definition has kind of morphed over the last few years. Um, I'll tell you the story of how I began looking at solo aging, and that was about 10 years ago when I was doing a lot of retirement coaching. And a friend of mine and I were having a glass of wine in one of those cute little wine bars in Palo Alto near where I lived. And I hadn't seen much of her the last few years. And I said, Sandy, what's going on with you? We're used to getting together once a month or so, and you've just been pretty scarce. And she said, well, I've been spending my life on an airplane, going back and forth to the East Coast to take care of my mother, who's 87 and not doing very well. And recently, my brother and I decided we needed to help her find a safer place to live. So we found a lovely life plan community for her, and she's very happy there now. But the whole thing didn't end there. We had to get her moved. We had to downsize. We had to give away or sell the remaining stuff. And it's kind of still going on. And I listened to her, and at one point I looked at her and said, Sandy, you and I don't have kids. Who's going to do that for us? And of course, there was no answer. And that started me on the trajectory that is still my life today. So originally, my definition of a solo ager was anyone who didn't have children, whether they were married or single. And then I started to raise the profile of solo ager and started talking about it. And a lot of people came to me and pushed back hard and said, no, you're not the only solo ager just because you don't have kids. I have kids, but they live 6,000 miles away, or I have kids and I haven't talked to them in 10 years, or all kinds of different situations, kids that failed to thrive. So I expanded the definition, and now I look at solo ager as anyone who is aging or anticipates aging without the support of family. Because historically, family, especially children, were kind of the only morally obligated people to take care of you as you got older. And back 100 plus years ago, people had children for lots of reasons, some of which were they wanted to carry on the line, they wanted help on the farm, and they wanted somebody to take care of them in their old age. So anyway, so there you have it. And that's really my definition of what a solo ager is.
So why, Sarah, why is this topic so important? Like, give us some of the numbers, because I think the numbers are quite amazing when we start looking at how many people are aging solo.
Yeah, you're right. The numbers are kind of daunting. And I think what I'll do is show a slide that really illustrate this quite colorfully. So let me do that. Now, as you can see on this slide, on the right-hand side, you have people who are um, above the age of boomers. I like to look at this as what's happened with the boomer generation. So that 2.2 million illustrates people out there who are 74, 75 plus, who really were born before the boomers. And I kind of need to change this slide. It should actually say, I think, 76 or 77 now, because boomers are now, I believe, the oldest boomers are 77. So you can see that there's not very many of them compared with what happens next. In the early boomers, which is the middle bar, you see that it has now increased more than twofold, the
Wow.
number of people that don't have children and the percentage of people that don't have children. And then with the late boomers, we're up to almost 20% of women who didn't have children. And baby boomers are well out of childbearing age now. So as the boomers actually created kind of a tsunami in the child-free or childless arena, as you can see. And you know, when you think about it, it's really no mystery why and how that happened. Because when you think about what was going on in the late 60s and early 70s, where that's when the boomers came of age, and we're all boomers sitting here today, when the boomers came of age, things were happening in our country. We had college unrest, much like we're seeing today. That was all about the war. That was, but it also led to the women's liberation movement. And at the same time, if you recall, in the mid-60s, we got an added present. We got the pill. And the boomers were the first generation of women that were able to take advantage of that. So when you have the pill and you have all this change going on in the country, leading to all kinds of advanced opportunities for women, you have a sea change going on. So doors were opening to prestigious colleges and universities, to careers that had really never been open except for a tiny crack for women before. Now it was wide open. And 50 years later, you can see how that has totally changed our country, and it changed the lives of women completely. And I was one of those women who, when all that opportunity presented itself, said, you know, I think I have a different path here other than motherhood, not my path. And so many women said that. And then, of course, there are women who, for various reasons, weren't able to have children. So that's also lumped in there with the rate of childlessness, or I like to say child-free. So, so that's kind of how it happened. And those are the numbers that we're looking at. Kind of daunting in a way when you think of practically 1 in 5 baby boomer women didn't bear children. It's a lot. That's more than twice what it has been in all previous generations.
Yeah, it's doubling from that group that first started to the late boomers now that are coming into that point. It's going to create challenges not only for the individuals but society too, on how we take care of each other.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but I don't want to leave you with the idea that people who don't have children are the only boomers. As I said, are they, sorry,
Right.
the only solo agers.
Solo
So
agers, right.
once again, let me share my screen with you because I want to show you a different picture of solo agers. As I mentioned, I think it's anybody who doesn't have family support going forward as they age. So there's all kinds of categories of people that don't have family, that don't have that support, or they live very far away. There's just a lot of different bubbles, and I suspect a number of people who are watching or listening to this today might find themselves in one of those bubbles.
Yeah, absolutely. Even when I think as you and I talked about too, when you add in gray divorce and you add in like you talked about childless couples and with children living so far away, even on other continents now. So
Mhm.
again, it's not easy to get back to help parents. So
Yeah,
yeah, the challenges are enormous.
yep, they are. They are.
So Sarah, okay, I'm a solo ager. I'm sitting here. I just understood everything you said. I've internalized it all. What's my next move?
So interestingly enough, your next move is not terribly different than someone who does have children, who's thinking ahead and being proactive about their later life. And you guys are in the finance field. You understand the importance of creating plans for the future, of amassing a bucket of money for the future. And solo agers have to think about those same things, only it becomes a little more critical for them because when you look at what actually happens in the world, at least in our country today, often older adults just go blithely on as though nothing was going to ever happen. And then there's a crisis. And guess who rushes in to clean up the mess? Usually it's the adult children. Whether they're happy about it or very willing to do it or live anywhere nearby, that's what happens. But for solo agers, it's important for them to realize that there's nobody coming along behind to clean up the mess or to jump in and say, well, this is what I know my mother would like or my friend would like. Because if you don't make those plans and talk to people about what might happen and then what you want to happen if in the event that you can't speak for yourself or you are somehow out of commission and you need to go somewhere that's safer to live, if you haven't looked around and chosen a place to go, if you just left everything to chance, I find that darn scary for solo agers.
Right. So I've decided that that's what I want to be. I want to be a solo ager. So, so what are the things that I need to do? And you're right. So many people just go through denial and they just think that life somehow is magically going to take care of them and that nothing's going to happen to me. I'm in great shape, you know? But you're right. That moment of crisis comes. What should I have done previously from a planning standpoint in your mind is the best thing for someone aging in place as a solo agent?
All the things that you advise your clients who are parents to do. Create an estate plan, have an advance directive for healthcare, have a power of attorney for finances. But once again, I'm going to show my screen and advance this a couple. I like this pie chart. It's really developed. I developed it mostly by my own research and observation that the question, who will do this for solo agers, is at the crux of this really, because these are the kinds of things that adult children typically provide for their aging parents. So this chart makes a good starting point for looking at who am I going to designate to manage these things for me? Who am I going to designate to pay my bills, make my financial decisions, represent me legally? Who is going to administer my trust if I hopefully have a trust? Who is going to be there to decide whether I should have a certain kind of treatment in the hospital or not? Who decides where I'm going to live? These are all planning elements that I believe solo agers should make. These are plans to be made. So if you look at the kinds of services that solo agers might need, these are the kinds of professionals that solo agers should partner with, can partner with. Some of these duplicate each other a little bit, but these people there are people out there who can be designated to do these things for you. And sometimes it's a relative. Many solo agers are quite close to their nieces and nephews. Those are your number one candidates if you're close to them, and if you believe they are the kind of people that would be able to handle being a power of attorney or being your healthcare designee. That's kind of your first line of defense. But there are also solo agers out there who have no nieces or nephews. There's just simply nobody. But there are people that can be hired. So once again, another good reason to pay attention to your ability to accumulate a pot of money for later in life to keep you going. And, we're all living a great deal longer than our parents and grandparents did. Maybe not literally. You might have actually had a grandparent who lived into their 90s. But today, people are going to be doing that routinely. And if you're retiring in your 60s, do you actually have enough money for another 30 years? Those are all the kinds of questions that I know you ask your clients and you work with them on. But these are the kind of additional professionals that might be part of your team. I like to suggest to solo agers that they create and develop a team. I do some workshops for groups of solo agers where we really get into the weeds, and the solo agers create their plan and come up with and actually talk to, and in some cases engage right during the workshop, someone to do this for them later in life. So these are the other professional services. And then something that you and your colleagues might do is to help your solo ager clients develop a plan. And this is actually a checklist that people can work with to look at where they're going to have areas of need. For instance, one very important one that often gets neglected, I'm sorry to say, in estate planning today is pet care. If you have a beloved dog or cat or goldfish, who's going to take care of that creature if you cannot? So there are all kinds of little things that traditional estate planning doesn't always get into. And there's a portion on this chart, as you can see, where it says, who do you support? Well, what happens if you're incapacitated and someone else is looking for your support? What happens to that? What happens to that relationship? Where does that fall? So all kinds of things to think about when you're helping solo agers to develop a solid plan for their future.
So what you're talking about really is creating new networks, creating new relationship bonds, webs, if you will, that can take the place of the traditional model. I mean, that's basically what we're talking about. Now, if you're a solo ager, and for some reason the aging in place idea is not a good one, is there an alternative?
Yeah, absolutely there is. And again, it's going to depend quite a bit on your finances. There are lots of different alternatives for where to live. And I've often called myself the the anti-aging in place person, because for solo agers, if aging in place means to you that you're going to stay put in your 2 or 3 story suburban home, or even more dangerous, country home with services, 20, 30 minutes away, and the nearest neighbor a half a mile away, is that a smart way for a solo ager to remain later in life? I don't think so. My answer is no. I believe that as a solo ager, and really, to me, this applies to everybody, the social aspect of later life is just as important or even more important than the legal, the financial. If you have people around you to help you, to support you, and that you would in turn support in their hour of need, you have so much more richer life. Now, whether that means you do home sharing with another person or two in the big house that you don't need anymore, or you move in with somebody else, that's becoming more and more popular.
The Golden Girls.
The Golden Girls, exactly, the Golden Girls model. And who knew back in the 80s that was going to be our foremost model for solo aging? But it truly is. It truly is. So that's home sharing. And then again, some people who are listening to this may be familiar with co-housing. These are communities called intentional communities that are springing up all over the country. There's probably about 300 of them around the country in various locations, where people intentionally build a community together. Everyone has their own home, their own, usually it looks like a condominium on one level. But you build a community. You have meals with your fellow co-housers 2 or 3 times a week. You develop and work on the property together. When there is elder co-housing as well as just simple co-housing, which is always multi-generational. And of course, a lot of people that I talk to who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they want nothing to do with a life of only people of their own age. They want to be in a multicultural environment. So co-housing community might be just the ticket for them. And then there are, of course, the traditional retirement communities for people who do want to live amongst people that are of similar age and similar interests. And they're all over the country, of all different price points and interest areas. So those are all big considerations for people later in life. You have to have a few coins to rub together to be able to move into some of those retirement communities, but it sorts itself out in terms of ability and need, and of course they vary tremendously from one part of the country to another.
Absolutely, but isn't it kind of true that these kind of communities are very popular on the coast, but not so much in the Midwest or in the middle of the country?
Well, it's funny. It used to be that the coasts were what people ran to when they retired, but that's not so true anymore, especially for people that do have kids. And I speak at a lot of these life plan communities and continuing care communities, and you know where I get sent most often? The Chicago area.
Yeah, sure.
So, middle of the country, but people want to stay with others that they know. They want to stay in something familiar. It's just not as attractive to go trotting off to Florida anymore. Although, having said that, there are plenty of these communities in Florida and Arizona. And as you can see on the screen, I live in Santa Rosa, California. That's one of the most expensive places. And we have those communities too, but they're incredibly expensive. So yeah, they're really all over the place.
That's good to know. Read, back to you.
Sara, it seems like one of the things that, as I've heard you've been talking about this, is one of the big risks that people run into is putting off a lot of these decisions. Because when you had that list up there, there's a lot on that list for people to go through, to find different people to fill out the list, to keep the list updated. So I guess just comment on that is one of the things is waiting too long. So when should somebody start thinking about this and putting this list together, and maybe how can somebody start to create this list? Can they like find this list somewhere? Like do you have it on your website, or how would somebody get a hold of this list to
Well,
walk
I
through it
have,
with their clients? Like our audience is primarily financial advisors, so
sure.
they seem like they would be one of the good go-to people for solo agers if they are a client of this financial advisor, for that advisor to start to go through this list. So how can one go about creating this list?
I have some of the tools on my website and through my book. They are not particularly tools designed for financial advisors. They're designed for people, everybody, everyday people who are solo agers and even those who aren't. Um, and so I think that from what's available already out there, you can kind of develop your own worksheet that you want to use
Okay.
with your clients. Not too hard to do. I have some of those tools. I'm trying to remember now whether I've put a couple of them on the website or not. But I do often talk to and work with a number of financial advisors, and I love the fact that you're interested in doing this. You know, I back about 15 years ago when I first started doing retirement coaching, I was back living in Silicon Valley then, and I decided, well, my best partners out there are financial advisors. So I joined the Financial Planning Association as kind of a low-level sponsor in my area and went to all of their meetings and learned so much. But one of the things I learned is that there's two kinds of financial planners, financial advisors out there. There are those that are only interested in crunching the numbers. And then there are those that are interested in really working holistically with their clients. And I so love that because I think that's terribly important. Um, often your clients, often for your clients, you are the only professional, other than maybe their doctors, that they see on a regular basis, even if it's 2 or 3 times a year. You've been working with some of them, I suspect, for decades, and they trust you. They may go to a lawyer to develop an estate plan, and they probably see that lawyer twice in their lives. There are very few people I talk to anymore that have the quote unquote family attorney. It's just
Yeah.
it's just a figment of the past because attorneys are so blasted expensive now. So you pay just what you need to get that estate plan done, but their ongoing team should include you. They're financial planners.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So one of the other things you were talking about, Sarah, I found interesting is when you're talking to solo agers, whether you're giving a presentation or whether you're working with them individually, where are they thinking about moving? If aging in place, because I'm sure they're hearing the message from you that aging in place might not be the best solution for them. Where are you seeing them? Is there any trend that you kind of see in the future that you're seeing more and more people look at a little bit in greater interest, with greater interest than maybe moving into a retirement community as opposed to aging in place in their homes?
Well, that's what I encourage is looking at retirement communities that they can
Okay.
afford or finding a way to develop their own community. I think, a lot of people are very resistant to this. People come back with all sorts of reasons why they don't want to do that. I'm a loner, I'm not a joiner. I've always done fine on my own. I see people when I want to, and on it goes. So that's all well and good, but life changes as we get older. And I think a lot of people just aren't willing to acknowledge that, to
Yeah.
acknowledge the idea that at a point they're probably not going to be able to drive anymore. They can't just pop in the car and go meet a friend for lunch. So yes, we have Uber and Lyft, and those are wonderful tools for being able to stay mobile and stay social. But life changes, our health changes. Yes, we all know people who made it to 100 living in their own home and still doing fine in most respects. But that shouldn't be everybody's model that they hold up, because the statistics say that that's not going to be the picture for most of us. Most of us are going to be dealing with some kind of chronic condition that may render us less mobile, less mentally capable of functioning the way we always have. And I find that the biggest barrier to what I'm talking about and what I'm encouraging people to do is the unwillingness to admit that aging brings changes. People just think that life is going to go on the way it has for the last 50, 60, 70 years.
Yeah, and I
I
think
I'm sorry, Reed. They also look at retirement that way. Like all of a sudden, retirement is spring break for seniors, you know?
Right.
And it's all
Right.
about, where can I travel to this month?
Yeah.
So anyway, go ahead, Reed. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think one of the key points that you bring up, Sarah, is the importance of planning and the importance of not putting this off. All of us work in the retirement coaching space, and we help people with that. And that is something that people resist often, or they put it off until something happens. And I would just encourage all of the solo agers to start developing this plan earlier as opposed to later, because it's going to
Yeah.
take a while to find these people. Some of the people who may be on your list initially will not be on your list 3 or 5 years later when you
That's right.
actually may need them. So you need to constantly update that list.
Yeah,
And
I'm
I think
nodding my head.
that just makes to me that the aging process, it makes it so much less, there's so much less stress and anxiety, and you can enjoy life a lot better if you know that you have these people you can rely on when you need them. I just went through a similar situation with my parents, Sarah. They both passed away in the last 8 months, and my sister and I were their caregivers. They
Mhm.
lived in a small town. Luckily, there was assisted living and nursing home care in that community, but I can't imagine if they didn't have anybody to help them do this.
Yeah.
So it's one thing kind of to have this in a metropolitan area, because there are a lot of resources. In these more rural communities, there aren't as many resources. We
Yeah.
ran into a number of situations where they had to go to the hospital, which was a half hour away, and then we had to figure out how to give them a ride home, because so just the ride service part of it was very daunting. And that happened probably at least a half dozen times, where we had to figure out how to get
Yeah.
them back to where they were living. So
That's a great testimonial, Reed.
there's all kinds of interconnected pieces here that I didn't understand it until I actually got into it with my parents. And
Yeah.
again, I can't fathom somebody going into this themselves as they're aging and not knowing where to
Yeah.
turn, who to ask about this. And I do believe that the financial advisor can kind of be that point person for many of
Mhm.
these connections. If they're the ones who can
Absolutely.
put this list together for their clients and always kind of be one of those go-to people that the advisor can reach out to. So
Yeah.
that's
Absolutely.
why
I
I
mean,
think this topic is so important, is that the
yeah.
we all need to understand that these people don't have a support system in many cases. And how can us that are in the professions that help these people be that support person? So
Yep. You've said it. And when I give talks on solo aging, it's mostly to people who are solo agers. And when I ask the question, how many of you participated or were the sole person taking care of your own parents? almost every hand in the room goes up, because those are the people that, just like you, Reed, they got religion. They
Yeah.
saw what it takes
Yeah.
to help
Yeah.
an aging person get through those final months and years of life. So to not have a plan for that is scary. I think it's really scary.
And unfortunately, I think that's one of the events in our life that maybe kicks us into gear to actually doing some of this planning, because we're seeing it with our parents, and
Yeah.
my wife and I are having those same conversations. We should start thinking about this, because we've gone through it with our parents. And so,
Yeah. And one other thing we haven't talked about yet is, and just really tangential to this discussion, is letting the people in your life that you think you'd like to have take care of you or be responsible for decision making, having conversations with them. Because it's amazing how many times I will ask people, well, what does your estate plan look like? And they say, oh, I've got my nieces and nephews on there. And I said, well, have you talked to them? Well, no. And what do they know? What are they going to do for you? You need to have those conversations with the people that you appoint. And that goes for people with kids too. Talk to your kids, make them sit down and listen. I remember my own father. My parents were much older, so I lost them quite a long time ago. But my father, was very forward thinking, and he had decided to buy his own burial plot and get everything all set up for his own service. He did it all. And then he was probably only in his 60s at that point, and I was in my 20s. And he insisted that I sit down and listen to the plans he had made, and he wanted to even take me to the cemetery and show me the plot. Well, you can believe I fought that tooth and nail. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to talk to him about it. I was not interested. But he really pushed hard, and I caved. We had the discussion, and I went to the cemetery. And you know what? When he finally did die 10 years later in his mid-70s, I knew exactly what to do. It's the greatest gift you can give to your kids or the people that are following you. I don't want to say cleaning up the mess, but it really is that. It's the greatest gift you can give them.
Yep, document your wishes, and so it's easy for people to follow, because
and talk to them.
And talk to them. My dad was like your dad, Sarah. He spelled it out and he said, here's what we're doing, and here's where the information is, and here's what we've done. So yeah, it's very important that's the whole start of it, is there has to be a conversation with these people who are going to help you, because all of us are gonna run into these situations at one point or another. It might be sooner, it might be later. So to have these conversations as early as possible is wise advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely.
Sarah, what advice can we give our audience here, financial advisors? Should they bring up these things? Should they make it part of the life plan that they're trying to finance in order to better serve their client?
Absolutely. They should absolutely have those discussions with their clients, and make sure your own house is clean first. Do your own planning, so that you can say to your clients, here's what I did, or here's what my spouse and I did, or here's what, if maybe your financial planners also, there's plenty of them out there that are solo agers. Here's what I've done. There's no better guide than to say, follow my lead. So yes, I think that you are instrumental in helping clients make a plan for the future.
Right, because you talk about the fact that these are trusted advisors that they go to for financial reasons, and they're really, as a client, you're really leaning on them, and you hope that this is the place where I go to find out what happens next. And and there's a cost. All those things that you talked about a few minutes ago. There's costs associated with that, and many times what I find is somebody will leave unexpectedly, and the family is left behind, or whoever has been planning their life with them, and all of a sudden they don't know what to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right. As you say, your father gave you a great gift.
Yes, he did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So Sarah, as we wrap up today, is there anything else that we didn't cover? Any points you'd like to make for the audience that we didn't get a chance to go over?
Boy, I don't think so, Reed. I think we pretty much covered the field. I like the questions that you asked and the discussion we got into, because I think it really laid out a good guide for planning for and helping your clients. So yeah, I think we've covered the ground.
I'm glad you shared the slides too, Sarah, because it was a lot easier to look through that list and to kind of see both on the slide with the bubbles along with the list. I think the list is really important for people to have. So let me pull up your contact information here,
Okay.
Sarah, in case, whoops. So here's Sarah's contact information. If you'd like to reach out, her website is sarazeffgeber.com. Her book is in the center there, Essential Retirement Planning for Solo Agers. You can find that book on anywhere that books are available. It'll be very easy to find. Just search it by title or by author. You can find Sarah's writing in Forbes. Just go to Forbes.com is where she writes, and then you can search by her name, and it will come up with the list of articles that she's written. And if anybody would like to reach out to Sarah, her email is sarah@lifeencore.com. Thanks again for joining us today, Sarah. That was a great discussion.
Well, thank you both. I appreciated the invitation and I enjoyed being on the show.
And thanks to the audience today for everybody joining us on today's episode. We'll see you next time when we continue exploring retirement and longevity planning beyond the numbers.